Hello everyone, welcome back to the class Food Safety and Environmental Sustainability. Today we would like to explore and learn together about HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And based on the Codex Alimentarius, we know that HACCP is a system that is including in the food safety management. So that is why we are learning and we'll understand what's actually HACCP in the food safety management. And you will be learning together with me. I am Risanti Situmorang. I am an assistant professor in Department of Nutrition in Universitas Sumatera Utara, Indonesia. Well, so by this lecture, we expect that everyone in this class will understand three things. The first one, to understand what is the definitions and how is the history of the HACCP. And the second objectives is to understand the importance of HACCP. Why is this supposed to be mandatory and so on. And the last one will be to understand the principles and the steps of HACCP. Just for introduction, we know that there are 12 steps of HACCP and there are 7 principles of HACCP. Well, talking about HACCP, HACCP, actually there are two important terms inside. We have hazard and we also have critical control point, right? So generally speaking, hazard is any source of potential harm, danger, or may adverse effect on people, property, or the environment or processes. So it's related to the harm and also danger. But in food safety, a hazard refers to any biological, chemical, and also physical agent that can cause harm when present in food. These hazards can lead to foodborne illness, injuries, or contamination. So there will be a severe effects that caused by the food safety hazard. Well, when we talk about hazard, if we see the characteristic of the hazard, I divided hazard into 3 categories. The first one is the biological hazard, the second one is a chemical hazard, and the last one is a physical hazard. The biological hazard may come from bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. For example, like we have a Salmonella in a raw eggs, or maybe Taenia saginata in steak or beef steak. And also we have natural toxins, pesticides, heavy metals, or food additives in unsafe amounts when we talk about a chemical hazard. And we already learned about this in the previous section before. For example, like we have Minamata cases in Japan because there was mercury in the fish. And the last one is about a physical hazard. What is physical hazard? Physical hazard is any type of foreign objects that found in the food that shouldn't be there, and they can cause serious harm or injury. For example, like glass shards, or maybe there are metal fragments, or maybe parts of human body like nails, hair, something that is not necessary in the food. Let's take a look and have some practice to identify which type of hazards that in this picture. Well, we have the first picture here. Okay, so we see here in this first figure we have a braid with visible mold growth characterized by the blue-green fuzzy spots, right? So which kind of hazard is this, from the biological, physical, or chemical? Well, it's probably from the biological hazard because we see this blue-green fuzzy spot comes from the mold or fungi that is may cause from the improper storage or maybe from humidity or maybe from the expired shelf life. Well, let's take a look another figure. Well, next, let's see the figure number 2. Okay, here we can see that there is a workers that they didn't use the personal protective equipment very secure and very well, because we see that they didn't have or they didn't wear any mask, and when they are talking or maybe have some chit chat with their friends, there will be a potential of the droplets from their mouth exposed to the food. So of course this is a part of the hazard. Which part of hazard? Which type of hazard do you think? Is it biological, physical, or chemical? Well, the potential of hazard here is maybe comes from the biological hazards. Okay, let's take a look the figure number 3. Here we have a cockroach on the food that they may carry bacteria, viruses, or maybe parasite like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria that can contaminate food and cause the foodborne illnesses. So in this figure we can see that there is a potential of the biological hazard, but not only the biological hazard, but there is also a physical hazard, like the body parts of the cockroach may contaminate the food, like maybe their legs, their wings, even their faces that is contaminated into the food. Let's see another figure. Okay, in this figure we see that there is an apple that is injected by some chemical substances, and there will be a potential contamination with toxic chemicals, pesticides, or maybe unapproved additives. So in these cases, what kind of hazards do you think? Sure, it should be a chemical hazard. Let's see another example. Here we see that there is a fish that is exposed to the airborne bacteria, dust, and potential cross-contamination from the handling. Lack of proper refrigeration also could lead to bacterial growth. That is, will be increasing the salmonella and also the listeria contamination, because we know the fresh fish should be stored in a cool place like refrigerator, but here it's exposed directly to the sunlight. And if the fish come from the polluted waters, they may contain like maybe heavy metals or pesticides or maybe other toxins. So in order to preserve the fish, some of the vendors also will sometimes they use the formalin in order to extend the shelf life of the fish. So that is also part of the chemical hazard. And for the physical hazard, we see that the worker or the seller here, they didn't use any gloves, or maybe they didn't use a good personal hygiene. So we can see that the fish are placed in unhygienic surface that is maybe contaminated with many kind of hazards that is maybe affect the quality of the fish. Okay, we already see the type of the characteristic of the hazard based on their characteristic. Now we are going to see the types of food safety hazard based on the sources in the food production. So there are two types of the hazard based on their origins. The first one is that Hazards that is originating from the raw materials that must be eliminated or reduced to an acceptable level during the process of manufacturing. The second type of hazard is that hazards that can be introduced or worsened from the processing environment, usually to poor GMP conditions. Okay, we already understand about the hazard and the types of hazards. Now we are going to the second important terms that is including in the hazard analysis critical control point. We already know about hazards, now we are going to the critical control point. What is critical control point? Critical control point is a specific step in the food production process where control can be applied to prevent, to eliminate, or to reduce a food safety hazard to an acceptable level. So, to identify a critical control point is a crucial part of the hazard analysis critical control point. There are three considerations to the critical control point. The first one is it's supposed to be essential for food safety. And then it can be measured and monitored, so there will be a number usually. There will be a temperature, the time, a pH, or also the microbial levels. And besides that, the CCP usually also has a preventive or corrective actions. But maybe sometimes we are confusing about what is PRPs, OPRPs, or CCPs, because sometimes they are look similar in the food safety management. Just to make it clear, the PRP simply just like the basic good practice, okay, that keep the food production environment clean and safe. So the PRPs or prerequisite program, it's prevent the contamination in general. For example, like we have to clean and sanitize the equipment before we use that, and also we ensure all the workers wash their hands before handling the food. So it is PRPs or prerequisite program. Okay, next, OPRPs. Okay, what is OPRPs? OPRPs is operational prerequisite program that is like a special preventive measurement that focus on specific steps in the food processing where hazards need to be controlled but do not require full critical control point. So usually the OPRPs is used to prevent the quality of the food, to prevent the contamination of the food before processing. So it's to ensure that the quality of the materials that will be used for the CCP is free of the contamination or free of hazard, okay? For example, we use metal detector to check for metal fragments in food, and also we use like a temperature control to prevent bacterial growth. Like we know how to keep the meat in freezer or in chiller, or so in conclusion we can say that OPRPs are more specific than PRPs but not as strict as the CCPs. So there is a level here. Okay, we are going to the last one is critical control point. Okay, critical control point is the most critical step. It's the most essential step in the HACCP. Okay, so input production CCP is a very critical, because in CCP is the place where a hazard must be controlled to prevent unsafe food. So if this CCP analysis is fails, means the food safety is at risk. Okay, like for example, CCP is we have to cook a chicken in a specific temperature, for example, like 75 degrees Celsius, right? For what? to prevent the growth of bacteria, for example, like salmonella, right? So in CCP we have a specific number of measurement in order to control the quality of the food. Or maybe another example is like when we pasteurizing the milk at the right temperature to eliminate harmful microbes. So that's the CCP. So we already understand what is PRP, we understand what is OPRPs, and we understand the CCP. So the basic one, we talk about PRPs, and then the top one is talking about the CCP, or critical control point. Well, let's see the next slide. Here I have some example in making a bread. We see here that in making a bread, what is the potential PRP? Do you have any idea? Well, as I mentioned before, PRP stands for the basic prevention. So in making bread, the PRPs, of course, like we have to clean the equipment, we have to sanitize the equipment. Also, we do the pest control. We also have to make sure the personal hygiene of the workers by making sure that they use their personal protective equipment such as their hairnet, mask, gloves, and so on. And for the OPRPs, here we can sifting the floor. Why we have to sifting the floor? We sifting the floor to remove foreign objects like metal fragments or maybe like stones that is contained in the floor itself. And the last one is, of course, the CCP, or the critical control point. As I mentioned before, in CCP we have a specific number, right? So in CCP, baking the bread at the correct temperature and time in order to prevent any kind of hazard that may contain in the bread making process. Okay, so we already understand about what is hazard, the types of hazard, and we also already understand what is the critical control point. So these two important terms that already understood by us, right? So we are going to understand what is hazard in general. Okay, so hazard analysis, critical control point. There is a word analysis here. So what to analyze? Obviously we want to analyze the hazard, right? So hazard analysis critical control point is a food safety management system that helps identify and control food safety hazards. Okay, or another explanation is HACCP is a systematic approach to hazard analysis or hazard identification, assessment of risk, and control. And a major focus of the HACCP program is from farm to the table. So when we talk about the HACCP program, of course we are thinking from the raw materials until it's ready to eat or it's ready to consume. HACCP is a concept as well as a method of operation that apply to all phases in the food production. So like I mentioned, it's including from the agricultural production until its consumer use. So what kind of hazard in the upstream we have to analyze all until what kind of potential hazard in the consumer use. So it's such a complex management system. And when we're talking about hazard, it's not only applied only for a big industry, but it also can be applied for a small food business, like maybe a store that sell a lunch, or a small restaurant, a small cafe. So when we're talking about hazard, it's not only for a big industry in the food business. Okay, so we already learn about the definition of the hazard, talking about the definition of hazard, definition of CCP, the difference between CCP, PRP, and OPRP. And now we are going to understand when actually HACCP is started and who started. I would like to categorize the history timelines into 4 stages here. So the first stage is the early development. It's on 1959 until 1971, where the origins of HACCP here came from the concern of zero contamination for the astronauts. So the NASA partnered with Pillsbury and the US Army at the time to develop a system that could guarantee that all the foods that the astronauts will consume free of the contaminants, or zero tolerance for the contaminants. Yes, we can imagine that on the moon, where resources are extremely very limited and very scarce, the foodborne illness could be life-threatening, right? It's very serious, life-threatening. So there is no easy access to fresh water, medical treatment, or maybe alternative food supplies. So to prevent this, the space agencies have to follow the strict food safety protocols. So in 1971, the Pillsbury officially introduced HACCP principles at the National Conference on the Food Protection. Okay, so that is the first stage. We will see the second stage here. In second stage, there is an expansion and regulation development that is happened around 1970s until 1980s. Here's the Food Drug Association and the United States Department of Agriculture. They began to explore HACCP application in food industries beyond space programs. And in 1985, the U.S. National Academy of Science, or NAS, they recommend HACCP as the best system for food safety. And WHO and International Commission on Microbiological Specification for Foods, they promoted HACCP internationally. So there are a lot of major foodborne illness outbreaks during this period, highlighted the need of preventive safety system. Okay, we are going to the third stage. In the third stage, it's around 90s era until 2000s era. The Codex Alimentarius Commission, we know that Codex Alimentarius is the organization that is concerned or handle the food safety management, right? So they published the HACCP guidelines at the time, and they're setting a global standard for the food safety. And in the US, they started to implement mandatory HACCP for seafood, meat and poultry, and for the juice industries. And many countries made HACCP a legal requirement for food production, processing, and distribution at this era. Okay, so now we're going to the last stages. Okay, it's from 2010s and until this era, until present. So in this era, the digitalization and modernization of HACCP is occurred. There is an integration of HACCP with ISO 20000 and other food safety management system like FSMS that has strengthened the global food safety protocol. So it becomes the part of the ISO 20000. And the most updated to hazard analysis and critical control point is HACCP 2023, like 2 years before, and which includes minor changes, addition, and updates. And in this explanation, we will talk about the HACCP 2023 guidelines. Okay, we already see the first objective of this lecture. Now we are going to the second objectives. Why is HACCP important? Why do you think HACCP is important? Okay, HACCP is important in order to minimize the hazard, of course, because we have to control the hazard, right? Why we have to control the hazard? Because we want to identify the cause of the food contamination or food poisoning. So by controlling and identifying the food hazard or food contamination, we can control or we can prevent the effect of the food contamination. Okay, and the next one is to improve the food safety. Yes, HACCP is part of the ISO 22000. As I mentioned, like ISO 22000 is the food safety management system, right? So by doing the HACCP, we improve the food safety. So the companies can produce safer and more consistent food products that reducing the risk of foodborne illnesses. The third one is to build the consumer confidence. Just imagine when we are going to maybe to the department store or maybe to the grocery store or maybe to the supermarkets, and you found the similar products, for example, maybe noodles, okay? When we see two kinds of noodles with the same flavor, maybe, but one of the noodles certified with HACCP and the other one is not certified with HACCP. Probably if we are concerned about the food quality, we will choose the food or the noodles that is certified with the HACCP certified, right? Certification. So yes, the HACCP is important because it builds the consumer confidence to buy and also to consume it. And besides that, HACCP also important because it meets the regulatory requirements. So many countries right now, they already require HACCP implementation for the companies that is produce and process food. So this is like a mandatory from the government. So usually the government will ask the industry, the food industry, to implement the HACCP system. Okay. And the last one is about money, about efficiency. So HACCP also can improve the efficiency because it can help the companies, the food industry, the food business to identify and to prevent food safety issues before they occur. So it can save costs and improves operational efficiency. Okay, in HACCP, we have 12 steps and also 7 principles of hazard analysis critical control point. I will explain about this one by one, and as we can see in the figure, there's a number 1 until 12, where number 1 until number 5 is the prerequisite program before we conducted the principles of HACCP. Okay, so the first step is to assemble the HACCP team. The second one is to describe the product. The third one is to identify the intended use of the product. The fourth one is to make a flowchart. And number five is on-site verification of flow diagram and plan schematic. Okay, while we are going to the principle number 1, which is the second step of this HACCP management system, the principle number 1 is to list hazards associated with each step, and then the next one is to apply HACCP decisions tree to determine the critical control point, and then The next one is establish critical limits, and then establish monitoring procedures, and establish deviation procedure, establish verification procedures, and then the last one will be a documentation. Well, we will start with the step number 1. Assemble a HACCP team. Okay, there are 4 considerations in assembling a HACCP team. The team should include experts from different backgrounds or different areas. For example, like from the quality control, from the production, from the sanitation, and also from the food safety. Each person should bring their own knowledge from their background or from their expertise to identify risks and solve problems effectively. That's why we need a different background here. So there will be more insight put together to solve the problem. Okay, so every team member, they should know what they need to do and how they can contribute to the food safety. Okay, for example, like the quality manager, they have to ensure that the food meets the safety standards. And for example, the production manager, they can oversee the food making process and so on. And the next one is we have to identify the scope of the HACCP system and the applicable prerequisite for or the GHP program. So here we have to decide which products and which process that the HACCP plan will be covered. For example, like we want to make orange juice, okay? In which process we would like to see the HACCP, okay? Is it from the packaging system, or in the processing system, or maybe in the storage system? So we have to define which product and processes that the HACCP will be covered. Actually, the more complex or the more complete process we cover, the better, because it means we can prevent all of the hazards in each stage or in each process of the process of making the food or making the products. So the next one is to identify the prerequisite program, like maybe like hygiene practice or maybe good manufacturing practice and a sanitation measure that should be in place before the HACCP is implemented. Okay, so that's the first one, and we will see here that we have a form number 1. In this form, we can identify the name of the product, who is the HACCP team leader, and who are the HACCP team members. Usually the HACCP team members, as I explained before, that is supposed to be comes from different kinds of backgrounds. So usually there will be more than 2 people in the HACCP team members. So just kindly type all the names here. And the form number 2 is the terms of reference that is used to identify when the HACCP system plan started and when it will be end. So also in the terms of reference, we have to identify the hazards that needs to be covered, whether it's in the processing or in the storing or in the preparing the materials on so on. So just identify all the hazards that will be covered in this HACCP plan. Okay, so we're going to the next step. Okay, now we're going to the step number 2. Describe your product. So in describing your product, you have to make sure all of the characteristic of the products, the quantity of the raw materials, like is there any presence of the allergens, the storage condition, and so on. Make it as clear as you can. So in describing the product, we can use the form number 3. It is product description, that is the name of the product, the important product or characteristic, and how it is to be used, type of the packaging, shelf life, where it is to be sold, labeling instruction, distribution, and if you can explain about the allergen and so on, you can explain more about that. So let's have some example here. I have a can of 100% juice pulp. So the product name is supposed to be 100% juice pulp. Okay, and the important product characteristics, it's 100% pure orange juice and no added sugar or preservatives. And how it is to be used? It is used can be used as a base for smoothies or cocktails, and it also can directly drink. Best serve is when it's chilled. And type of packaging is the aluminum can. But here I only make an example of the primary packaging, but you also can make your secondary packaging, like for example to cover the can they use a plastic or maybe the paper board or anything else. You can make the primary packaging and also the secondary packaging, and also if you have the tertiary packaging, you also can make it as clear as you can. And then the shelf life of this product is 6 months when stored in a cool and dry place, and make sure you can refrigerate after opening and consume within 3 days. And what it is to be sold, you can find it in the supermarkets and the grocery stores. And for the labeling instruction, there will be a list of ingredients like 100% of orange juice, and then nutritional information per serving, and also put the expired date and the storage instruction. And the distribution is distributed through wholesalers and also the retailers. So this is the example. You can make your own example, maybe for noodles, or maybe any kind of your products, maybe beef lamien, right? All of Taiwanese very love the beef lamien. Okay. So the next step is describing the use. Usually the step number 3 already including in the form number 3, that is describing the use of the product. So describe how and for what purpose your product will be used. Like before, we already see that the 100% of this pure juice can use to make a cocktails, can ready to drink or make your own smoothies. So describing the use of the products. Okay. And well, the next step is to make the flowchart. The flowchart is consists of the processes to make the products or the food from the raw materials until it's ready to consume or until it's ready to use. So we have to develop a flow diagram for the production process of any specific product to know the considerations that need to be in place to the flow diagram. So we have to understand how a flow diagram helps in conducting a hazard analysis, and we have to understand the need for on-site confirmation of the flow diagram. So here is an example. We still make an example from the 100% soft juice pulp. Here is an example from the raw material selection. So the fresh oranges are selected to be processed. After that, the orange that already selected, clean and sorted for the quality, followed by the juice extraction, filtration and pasteurization, blending and quality check, filling and selling, labeling and packaging, followed by storage and transportation, and the last one is retailing and consumer purchase. So from this flowchart we can see that the process is from the downstream until the upstream, from the raw material until it's ready to consume by the customer. Okay, so after we make the flowchart should be made by the HACCP team, like the team leader and all the members of the HACCP team in the first step, or in the step 1 that we already discussing before. So after they made this flowchart, they will verify the flow diagram. They will verify the flowchart, Directly, they go to the field and keep track of the manufacturing diagram to validate whether it's similar or whether it's not only similar, but whether it's the as same as in the reality. So the flowchart that they already made should be the same as in the reality. So they have to verify the flow chart or flow diagram in the step 5. And then we are going to the next step number 6, and also the principle number 1. Okay, in the principle number 1, we are conducting hazard analysis. So we can analyze hazards by identifying using many kinds of tools, like we can identify the man, the material, the machine, measurement. We can use the Ishikawa diagram. Do you know Ishikawa diagram? Like a fishbone diagram. So we can analyze what happened to the man, and then what happened to the material, what happened to the methods, what happened to the measurement, in order to identify or to analyze the hazard. For example, here the hazard will be categorized into 3 groups: the chemicals hazard, biological hazard, and also the physical hazard. That usually they will be sorted by the biological hazard. Usually will be sorted with only B. Physical hazard will be sorted with only P, and chemical hazard will be sorted with only C. Okay, so when we talk about later, we talk about the critical control point. In what hazard or what categories of hazards. For example, the CCP is the biological hazard, so usually there will be CCP-B, okay? Or maybe when it talks about the physical hazard, there will be a CCP-P, okay? When it talks about the chemical hazard, it will talks about the CCP-C, okay? I think it's clear. Okay, so to identify all the potential hazard is expected at every steps of the process. So that's why I said before that it's very important to identify which process that we would like to cover in HACCP plan. So in here we can see the process, the hazard in its process that we would like to analyze. Okay, and we evaluate the control measure that can be used to prevent or to eliminate a food safety hazard or to reduce to an acceptable level. Well, how to assessing the risk? Okay, because we are talking about the conducting hazard analysis. So how actually to assessing risk? Here, to assessing risk, we usually will use the frequency and severity scale that I also will explain this in the next step. That's how we can see the critical limits. Okay, so for example, the frequency and the severity. When we talk about the severity and frequency, for example, be eaten by crocodiles in the pool. Do you think that the frequency is high or very rare? And what about the severity? Of course, when someone enters to the pool that is, that there is a crocodile inside, of course the severity is very critical, right? The number is 4. But what about the frequency? Is there someone that comes to the pool that they already know that there is a crocodile inside? So I think that the frequency is very rare. So probably the frequency and then the severity, we can see that the frequency is very rare, or 1, and then the severity is 4, right? So if we see the number of this, it's probably the rating, how often it can be happen. The rating is only 2, because I don't think that there is someone that can just come to the pool that they already know there is a crocodile inside. So when we see the frequency and severity here, the score is probably 2. Okay, and when we conducting hazard analysis, the purpose of this step is to characterize the hazard plan, okay, where hazard must be prevented in the step, Okay, so it's very important. So how we can see the hazard analysis, how we can conducting the hazard analysis? Of course, by having tools like a form. We are going to the form number 5. Okay, in the form number 5, here's we have the hazard identification. So just identify the what kind of potential hazard inside, and then how you can control it, where you can control it, whether you can control at the CCP, or maybe you can control at the GMP or PRP, or maybe you can control it in OPRP. So just make all those kind of things, specify them and put it in the form. Okay, and form number 5 stands for the biological hazards, and form number 6 usually for the chemical hazards, and form number 7 is usually for the physical hazard. Okay, the next step is to identify the critical control points. That usually I will divide this selection into 2 steps of selections. The first one is using rating scale of frequency and severity from 9 to 4 that I already mentioned in the step 6. Okay, and we see that if the risk is low, 1 until 2 in both frequency and severity, it may be controlled by the PRPs. Okay, so now we already understand. So if the risk is low, so the frequency and severity is among 1 until 2, it usually will be controlled by the PRPs. For example, like we mentioned about the crocodiles in the pool before, right? And if the risk is moderate to high, around 3 until 4, it may require operational prerequisite programs of OPRPs. But if the risk is very high, 4 in both frequency and severity, we need a CCP or critical control point. Okay, so let's take a look an example here. If we see, if we're making a beef steak with a medium rare, okay, how do you think the risk level? Okay, I think for the risk level, for the frequency, I think the scale is 2. It's low to moderate because it's rare in countries with strong meat regulation and a strong meat inspection. And what about the severity? Severity could be maybe 3 or in moderate to high because it may cause discomfort, digestive issue, but it's still treatable. I don't think there is someone that is they consume medium rare steak or maybe rare steak contain of tiny saginata and then they pass away, right? So here is the severities maybe moderate to high. So the overall risk level is 2 plus 3 divided by 2. Okay, so the mean number is 2.5, means the risk is moderate risk. Okay, so the risk depends on meats, sourcing and cooking temperature, proper cooking to at least medium. So if the moderate risk is 2.5, what kinds of controlling we can use? Is it PRPs, OPRPs, or CCPs? 2.5 is around PRPs and OPRPs. So it depends on the decision making, okay? Well, the next selection or the second selection is we use the Codex 3. Okay, so according to the Codex Alimentarius, a critical point is a point that require monitoring. So in this Codex 3, we will use 4 questions that is already designed by the Codex Alimentarius. We see in the figure here, if we can see in the figure, the first question is there one or more preventive control measure? Okay, if yes, continue to the second question. Is this step specifically designed to eliminate the likelihood of a hazard appearance or to reduce it to an acceptable level? Okay, if yes, you can directly say that is CCP. Okay, but if no, you can continue to the third question. Can contamination along with the identified hazard occur, or can the hazard increase the unacceptable level? If yes, you can continue to the last question, question number 4. Can a subsequent step eliminate the hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level? If yes, this is not CCP, but if no, it's the critical control point. What if the second number 1 you answer no? If the answer number 1 is no, you can put an additional question here. Is the control at this stage necessary to ensure safety? If yes, you change the step process or the product and back to the question number 1. But if no, obviously this is not a critical control point and you stop. Okay? And by this Codex 3, we can identify the critical limits or the critical point of the hazard. And for these steps, we use the form number 8, CCP determination. In this CCP determination, we can identify which process step and also the incoming material. So we can see both in the ingredients and also in the process itself. And then we categorize the type or the category of the hazard, whether it's a physical hazard, chemical hazard, biological hazard. And then we see the question number 1, 2, 3, and 4 based on the Codex 3, and then we identify the CCP number. For example, maybe the process step or incoming material. Let's say when we want to make beef steak, okay? So the raw material is supposed to be steak, beef meat. Alright, the beef meat, the categorize and identify hazard probably from Taenia saginata. Okay, so after that we answer question number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we see whether it is a CCP or not. When it is a CCP, of course we make a Taenia saginata, it's CCP 1B, means it is CCP and it is a biological hazard and it is the biological hazards number 1. Okay, so just make it as clear as we can. Okay, now another form is unaddressed hazards. That is unaddressed hazards from the previous list, maybe from the sources of the meat, like maybe from the slaughtering place. So we identified all of the unaddressed hazards from the previous list, and then we identify methods of addressing the hazards. Okay. Now we are going to the step number 8, establish the critical limits. After we define the critical control points, it's the time for us to set the critical limits. Usually the critical limits will come with a minimum and or a maximum values or critical parameters. For example, like what is the maximum temperature, what is the minimum temperature, what is the minimum moisture level, the pH, or the conveyor belt speed. So in this established critical limits, we will talk about numbers. Okay, and here is the form that will be used in the critical limits. It has a plan that we identify the process step, and then the CCP number, like I mentioned before, CCP 1B means it is a critical control point, biological hazards at number 1, and you just identify maybe CCP 2P, and you use what is the hazard description, what is the critical limits, how we can monitoring the procedures, and how is the deviation procedures in order when there is a case that there is a deviation, how we can handle and tackle those problems, and also the hazard records or documentation. Okay. After that, the step 9, the CCP should be monitoring in order to control the potential hazards. So we have to make sure who is responsible for monitoring. Okay, we have the HACCP team, right? So we have to identify who is responsible for monitoring, how is the monitoring done, and how is the result of monitoring recorded, and who conducts the monitoring. All of these things should be identified in step number 9. After step number 9, we will have establish corrective and remedial actions. Corrective actions should be correct the cause of the deviation. So if we have some of deviation in all of the process, we have to correct what is the root cause. What is the factors that influence so the deviation can be happen. Okay, and we have to control any products that may be unsafe, and all of this kind should be recorded. Okay, after that we are going to the step number 11, verification. Verification is like a quality check for our HACCP plan. So we conducting activities such as audits, lab tests, and also equipment reviews to confirm that our food safety measures are actually working. So this verification step will help us to catch potential risks before they become a very serious problem. So this is a prevention steps. Okay, just make an illustration. So think about an internal audit is like checking our own homework before we submit it. Okay, so an external audit is, on the other hand, is like a teacher grading our work. So if we didn't check our submission before we submit, of course we will fail, or we will not pass the examination, or we will not pass the number of the grading of the homework, right? So it's very important to recheck first by the internal audit before we have the external audit that is usually will be handled by the third parties here. Okay, and then the last one is everything should be documented well. And like I mentioned before, in the Codex Alimentarius 2023 guidelines, all of the documentation can be digitalized. Okay, so what kind of documentation that is needed in HACCP documentation? The first one is maybe you can make the cleaning plans, the storage temperatures, the procedures, also significant hazard monitoring plans, hazard analysis, all those forms that we already see, the form number 1 until the form number 10 should be documented very well. Okay, well, okay, finally we are going to the conclusion. The conclusion is the first one, the definition and the history of HACCP. We know that definition of HACCP is the system or management system for the food safety that helps us to analyze the hazard and the critical control point in order to what? In order to prevent the food contamination and also the effect that comes from the food contamination. Okay, the second one, we talk about the importance of HACCP. What is the importance of HACCP? So we know that HACCP is very important in order to maintaining food safety by identifying and controlling biological, chemical, and also the physical hazard. And of course, we also already learned about 12 steps and 7 principles of the HACCP itself, from the assembly team until to document all those documents. Okay, so here is the lecturing about the hazard analysis critical control point. I hope you can understand, and if you have any kind of questions, you can feel free to message me or mail me in my email risantisitumarang@usu.ac.id. I hope you enjoy this class. See you on the next time.